Hi everyone, welcome to this JConf Peru 2022. This year we have a speaker from different parts of the world. Today we have Grace and Kathryn. Hi. Thank you for participating on this conference and to share with us all your knowledge. So let me do a brief introduction about Kathryn and Grace. Grace is a Java champion. She participates on different conferences around the world. She worked on IBM and worked with Open Liberty, microprofile, and cloud technologies. And in the case of Kathryn, she is a part of the Open Liberty team at IBM. She is graduated from McMaster University. And if you want, you can start with the presentation, and I will disappear and in the shadows. So if you need something from me, just let me know.
Great, thanks so much. Cool. So welcome to our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. We're from all over. I'm from the UK and Kathryn is from Canada in Toronto. So really, it's fantastic to be sort of having such international presence at this conference and joining you all today. We're going to be covering this session called Boosting Developer Productivity with Open Source Java Technologies. So hopefully you guys will find this interesting and perhaps pick up a few things that you could use to improve your own productivity when developing Java applications. So as we mentioned, who are we? My name is Grace and this is Kathryn. We both work at IBM, both sort of working on Open Liberty and other open source cloud native technologies within Java. If we don't get around to any questions that you have at the end of the session, then you can definitely feel free to reach out to us on social media. We're both quite active on Twitter, so our handles are there if you wanted to reach out either with questions or just because you're interested in finding out more. Either way, feel free to send us a message or follow us on Twitter. So starting with the open source technologies that we want to delve into here to learn about what features within them, what APIs within these specifications and tools can we make use of to really be productive and effective as developers. And the first of those is Open Liberty. So Open Liberty is really a very lightweight open source framework for building effective, fast cloud native Java microservices. So it's really a cloud native runtime that enables us to sort of provide you with the framework to be able to effectively build Java applications. It has been open sourced since 2017. And the fantastic part about that is that you can find it all on GitHub. So if you're interested in checking it out, you can head on over to openliberty.io, which is this website here, and it will take you to various elements of our website, like getting started, which has a starter project in there for you, guides, documentation, support, and of course our blog as well. So that's Open Liberty, and Open Liberty actually interoperates with and implements many other open source Java tools and technologies that we're going to take a look at. So one of those is microprofile. This is an open source, really community-driven specification that offers various different cloud native Java APIs. So really, this was designed by the community because, back in the day when we had sort of Java EE and it was being produced mostly by Oracle, there was quite a slow process in terms of actually getting features into the language, into the specification for us to be able to utilize, especially when it came to cloud native and microservices. And so the community decided to create this open source, community-driven specification to offer some of these APIs to complement the Java language. And so you can see the various different APIs that are offered here, and we've sort of split them into these core groups. So core at the bottom, and actually you'll notice that some of these APIs are also shared by another specification that we'll introduce later called Jakarta EE. So there's that core group at the bottom, integrate in the middle there. So really looking at how we integrate with third-party services, with other microservices within our application, and with other services in the cloud, really. And then observability at the top. So looking at, once we deploy this into production, how are we going to observe various different elements of our application to know how it's behaving in real time in the cloud. So that's microprofile, and it is a really helpful specification for you to be able to make use of these various APIs for your cloud native Java microservices. There are various different implementations of microprofile. So microprofile is a specification, so you will need an implementation to actually make use of it. And as you can see here, there are lots of different ones to choose from. And this is the great part about open source, is that you're not tied into one specific vendor. There's lots of choice, lots of variety in terms of different runtimes that support these open source specifications that you can make use of. We've given you a list here for versions 2.x, 3.x, 4.x, and 5.x, which is the latest release. And you can see here that there's various different specifications that you can use, both in sort of a beta release or also in GA. So you can also check out, if you're interested in learning more about these, there's a link at the bottom there, which takes you to the compatible implementations, so you can look into this in more detail. Now, I mentioned another specification, and that's Jakarta EE. So we'll move on to that next. Jakarta EE is really sort of what evolved out of Oracle and Sun open sourcing Java EE. So Jakarta EE is an open source ecosystem for cloud native Java. It offers various different APIs that build on top of Java SE, just as Java EE did as well. So there's lots of different APIs that you can choose from, and lots of different types of sort of profiles that you can utilize within Jakarta EE. So there's a core profile, web profile, platform. So depending on what specific APIs you need, how your application is built and developed, you might want to specify, you just need the core profile, or you want the web profile, or the platform, depending on the APIs that you want to make use of. And the nice thing is that you can deep dive into each of those APIs specifically by heading on over to the Jakarta EE specifications and taking a look at things like, for example, Jakarta config, Jakarta concurrency. One thing to note here is that due to legal reasons, there was a namespace change from Javax to Jakarta. So that's why all of these will be referred to as Jakarta from here on out. It sort of makes sense with the name of the project. But these are all held within the Eclipse Foundation, so they are all open source. Now, again, because this is a specification, you will need an implementation to be able to make use of it. Now, Jakarta EE 10 came out just a few months ago, so it is super new. And you can see some of the compatible implementations here for things like platform or the core profile. Remember, there's also web profile in there as well. Again, you can head to the Jakarta EE/compatibility link to find out more about which versions you can use depending on what you're interested in. We've also included sort of 9 as well here, in case you wanted to take a look at which implementations are compatible for that. So you can see we have OpenLiberty there for the platform compatible products as well. So that's Jakarta EE. So sort of why are we focusing on this? Why do we care about being productive? And what does that really mean? What does it mean to be an effective developer, to have that productivity? Well, there's lots of different parts to what developers do. Developers don't just create code. We do a lot of different things. We create new projects. We might add or edit code. We need to be building our code and packaging and running it probably. And of course, because we are all following best practices, we are great developers, we are obviously testing as well as developing. So we're going to be testing our code as well. And that involves not just running the tests, but also writing the tests as well. And of course, repeating this whole cycle as we iterate through the various features that we're implementing within our applications and developing it and introducing innovation. Not only this, but also, we are using tools to be able to achieve this. Things like IDEs, for example, editors, and being able to effectively use those as well when it comes to developing our applications is very important to us. So how can we utilize those open source specifications that I mentioned to enable a much greater, a much more effective and faster inner development loop, an iterative development loop? Normally, development loops can look a little bit like this. Now, bear in mind, this is a simplified diagram, so yours may have a few more extra steps in it, but just to make it simple for just now and sort of generalize, we created this overall diagram where, we're creating, we're building, we're editing, we're testing, and then we're going around again because we're agile, we're doing this in an iterative manner. And then not only this, but sort of it's all within, as I mentioned, this IDE and editor. So how can we use the tools best to be able to go through each of these sections, these segments or processes, to be able to be effective as developers? And we're going to take a look at each one in a bit more detail and look at which tools can enable us to do this. So the first thing, create. So when it comes to creating, how can we make this as easy as possible, as simple as possible, fast, effective, productive? And we can use things, for example, like starter projects. I briefly mentioned this when I was going through the OpenLiberty website, and we'll get onto that in a bit more detail in a minute. But essentially, there are lots of different starter projects you can choose from, which enable you to have a template, basic application for whatever project you're interested in. So, for example, MicroProfile has a starter project, and you can actually make use of it through your editor. So if you're using things like VS Code or IntelliJ, there are actually extensions and plugins that you can utilize to be able to do all of this without even needing to go to a browser. But if you don't want to do it in those editors, or let's just say you're an Eclipse fan and you don't want to use VS Code or IntelliJ, that's fine. You can also go to the browser as well. So you can head to start.microprofile.io. And essentially what this enables you to do is select from various different drop-down options. So it literally is as easy as a drop-down option, selecting the various features and sort of different, I guess, like elements to it. So what version of Java you want to be using, what runtime you want to be using, what version of MicroProfile you want to be using, what build tool you want to use. Is it Maven? Is it Gradle? And essentially choosing from each of these options to be able to give you that basic starter template for your application. Now, as well as MicroProfile, as I mentioned, there are other starters that you can make use of. So if you're interested in Jakarta EE, they also have a starter project which works via the same principle. And as well as that, there are runtime specific starters. So if you already know what runtime you want to use, you can just go to their specific website or their specific starter project and utilize that instead. So we have one for OpenLiberty, which you can access through start.openliberty.io or heading to the website and going to the starter project page. And essentially, again, similar process, a drop-down option, selecting things like your version of Java, what version of Jakarta or MicroProfile you want to use, what version of OpenLiberty. And by selecting all of this, it essentially gives you a zip file you can then unzip, and it gives you this very basic application structure or template for you to then build upon. So it essentially gets rid of all the faff of having to do that from scratch yourself. It gives you that automatic template, enabling you to essentially skip a few steps and go straight to actually developing the code specific to your application. So that can be a great way to make that create stage very effective and fast and productive as developers. And now I'm going to pass on to Kathryn to go through the other stages of that iterative development cycle, like build and test and deploy and everything like that. So over to you, Kathryn.
Great, thanks, Grace. Okay, so on to the build stage. So as developers, after you create your application, you edit your application, then you have to build your application, right? So you have to package, deploy, start your application. But this can be a lot to do during development. It can be quite tedious to have to rebuild, repackage each time. So what tools do we have that are open source for developers to use? And this is where a tool like dev mode comes in. So dev mode is a hot deploy tool. It has abilities to start your server, watch your application for changes, rebuild and repackage when needed, and redeploy your server. So it takes the onus off of the developer so that they can focus just on their code and they can live test the changes that they've made. And this dev mode is offered for OpenLiberty as a Liberty Maven and Gradle plugin. So on the right there, you can see I have a pom.xml file for a Maven project, and I just need to specify the Liberty Maven plugin and then run the Liberty dev goal. There's also container integration, so I could run the dev C goal if I wanted to test in a local container environment to really get that true to production environment and trying things out. It also offers debugging, so by default, dev mode makes a debug port available and allows you to connect with an IDE to that debug port to step through your application at any time. And we'll see these tools in actions during the demo portion as well. So next is the edit stage. So as you're editing, typically we work in an editor or IDE. So what do we have available when working with MicroProfile APIs or different runtimes inside my favorite editor or IDE? So whether that's Eclipse, IntelliJ, VS Code, NetBeans, what IDE or editor plugins are there available that help me as I develop? So there's many out there. You can see I've got a screenshot from the Visual Studio Code Marketplace. Just searching on MicroProfile, there's numerous different MicroProfile extensions as well as runtime specific extensions. You can see there's Quarkus by Red Hat, we have Liberty tools from Open Liberty, and this integrates directly into your IDE, which is really convenient. And again, they're offered for a wide range of IDEs. So what coding assistance specifically could I get in Editor or IDE? We know that editors typically, as we're creating our Java projects, it will offer assistance for working with Java. But what if I want assistance for working specifically with the microprofile APIs or the Jakarta EE APIs? And this is where language servers come into play. So one such open source project is Eclipse SP for MP, which is a language server for Eclipse microprofile. Again, completely open source and lives under the Eclipse Foundation. And what this does is it will provide in-editor language features for the microprofile APIs. So things like code complete or snippets for popular microprofile APIs, diagnostics or quick fixes when you use an API incorrectly directly in editor. So you get that feedback to fix your code or enhance your code before you actually run your application. And so there are extensions. So this language server project is available under the Eclipse Foundation, and then you would install the corresponding extensions into your IDE or editor of choice. So for example, there's a VS Code extension called Tools for Microprofile from Red Hat that does consume this language server project. So that's how you'd get it in editor. What about working with Jakarta EE APIs? There's actually a very similar project under the Eclipse Foundation as well called Eclipse LSP for Jakarta. And this is the language server for Jakarta EE project. And it will offer language feature support for the Jakarta EE API. So same kind of deal. It will offer snippets, completion, diagnostics, quick fixes as you add it with your Jakarta EE APIs. And I should mention that both of these projects are considered incubator projects under the Eclipse Foundation. So we're always looking for feedback from the community or for community to get involved. So if you do try these out after this presentation, if you have any feedback, definitely go ahead and open an issue there. Or if you think that there's a feature that you would like to see that isn't already there, definitely we're looking for contributions and for more community engagement here. All right, what about generating snippets of code or generating boilerplate code? Are there tools out there that can help us as we do that for an existing project? And the answer is yes. So there is code generator tools such as Open API tools. So for example, you could generate a microprofile REST client from an Open API documentation. And this is available as a command line interface if you use Open API tools, or as a VS Code extension, and that's what you see in the screenshot there to the right, where you can generate a microprofile REST client directly into your project. And we'll show this actually in action during the demo portion as well. You could also generate JAX-RS stubs with Open API tools out there. And finally, on to testing. So automated testing, what do we have out there that can help us write these tests easier? So you have your usual suspects, JUnit, Arquillian, but if you want to leverage containers, there is also technologies like test containers and microshed testing to mimic a container environment and make it that much easier to test your code and get that true to production-like environment for your integration tests so you can have more confidence that your code works the way you expect it to. All right, so with that, I'll move on to the demos. And I have some pre-recorded demos here today. So for the demos, I'm going to walk through creating a REST service and then connecting it to a REST client application. So we'll create two applications. And just for some variety, the first demo will be entirely in the Eclipse IDE, and the second demo we'll do entirely in the VS Code IDE. But like we said earlier, a lot of these tools are available for a wide range of IDEs or command line. So you're not limited to just these IDEs, which is nice. So for creating a REST service application, the first thing we want to do is create a new Open Liberty project. So this is using the Open Liberty starter that Grace was talking about before. So you can see it just prompts you for a group ID, an artifact ID, the build tool you'd like to use. So here we've selected Maven, and the Java SE version, which is nice. So here you can see that you can also pick the Java EE or Jakarta EE version and the microprofile version. And you'll notice as we change one, the other changes as well. So some versions of MicroProfile are only compatible with certain versions of Jakarta EE and vice versa. So what's nice is the starter project is smart enough to know which versions are compatible to make sure that your project functions right out of the gate. So here I've selected the latest, the EE9.1 version, or actually EE10 has come out since then, but EE9 to work with the latest MicroProfile version, MicroProfile 5. And then I just click generate project here and you get a zip project that you can unzip and you're ready to go. So here I am in Eclipse now. I've unzipped that project and I just want to show that I have the Liberty tools for Eclipse IDE plugin installed to my Eclipse environment. And if I go to my language server settings in Eclipse, you can see I've got multiple language server support here. So I've got MicroProfile language server support for MicroProfile properties files and Java files. I've got Liberty config language server support for working with my Liberty server configuration, and I've got Liberty tools Jakarta EE support for working with Java files. So these are those language servers I was talking about earlier, the LSP for Jakarta, LSP for MP projects, and then we have a Liberty specific language server as well. So now let's start our application. So if you remember, we talked about dev mode. So from the Liberty dashboard, I can click on my project and select start. And what this will do is start Liberty dev mode on my project. So it's building my project, installing all of the dependencies, and starting my server for me. And just to call out, this is a Maven project. So here's the Jakarta EE versions that I selected from the starter in my pom.xml. And you can see we've got the Liberty Maven plugin specified as well. That's what's enabling us to work with dev mode here. So just waiting for the application to start up. For the first time, it's installing all the features, all the dependencies, so it takes a little bit longer, but the nice thing is on subsequent reruns, it will be a lot faster to start up as well. And in Liberty, we have a file called a server XML file, and this is where we do our server configuration. So in the server XML file, you would specify the features that you want to use for your application and any other server configuration that you'd like to specify. So here you can see I've got a number of features: RESTful web services, JSON-P, JSON-B, MicroProfile, OpenAPI, and I am getting in-editor support for this file as well. So if I don't know what a feature is, I could hover over for more information, especially since this came from the starter project. You know, if you're just beginning and you don't know, that is nice support as well. So that last feature there, MicroProfile OpenAPI, that comes from the MicroProfile specifications. So you can see I've got some Jakarta EE features as well as MicroProfile. And now our application has started. So you can see at the bottom of the screen there, I'll move my mouse, that we've started in dev mode. So it's watching our application now for changes. And as we make changes, it will recompile those for us. So let's get into actually creating the bulk of the REST service. So I'm going to go ahead and in this example, just create a simple cafe service. So the first thing I'm doing is defining my drink object. So what a drink is. So it just has a name and a cost for my cafe application. You can see as I made that change, dev mode did recompile. So there's that source compilation was successful. And again, that works outside of an editor as well. So if you prefer to work entirely command line, you could do that as well and get that compilation support there. So I have my drink object. Now I'm just creating my cafe service. And in the interest of time, just copy pasting the bulk of the application here. But what this is doing is just creating a new cafe service, drink inventory. You can see I've just got tea, coffee, latte there. And you notice I have the app path annotation at the top specifying what endpoint I want that service to be available at. So because I'm using the OpenAPI feature from MicroProfile, I can access this OpenAPI endpoint to see all of the paths that are available for my application. So I can see all my get methods. I can even see my drink schema, and this is all generated for me, which is really helpful and really nice. So let's go ahead and try to access that cafe service, and we should just see a print our menu there that we've initialized. Let's use now another MicroProfile feature like MicroProfile Health. So I'm going to create a readiness check, and what this is in MicroProfile, you can define what your microservice, when your microservice is considered ready for you. So this is really helpful to report the health of your applications. And so here I'm just defining a readiness check. And if I happened kind of fast, but you might have seen that I actually deleted the whole class and then typed MP readiness. That is a snippet that is available from the microprofile language server. And so you get this whole block of code of functioning readiness check without, having to double check the specs. How do I do this? And now I can just build off of this as well. So there's actually one more step to use the microprofile open API feature, and that's to enable that feature in my server XML file here. So I'm typing a new feature and I get support for all of the features that I could possibly use. There's a whole lot, and I'll have descriptions. So I know I want to use microprofile health. As I type, you see I get that code completion for these features, and I can pick the latest microprofile from the latest MP spec. And you can see that dev mode actually is picking up that I've added that microprofile health feature. It's installing that feature to my application. So what's nice about Open Liberty is it's really modular. So you get only the features that you need. And that makes sure you have the right size image, your application image stays really small. And now I can access the Dash Health endpoint, and I see my readiness check up there and running. And then lastly here on the topic of language servers, what if I want to, say, add a new get endpoint to my cafe service? And this is where a snippet from Eclipse LSP for Jakarta could come in handy. So here I am just going to Jax get. It's a snippet for creating a new get resource method. And you can see just by inserting it, I get the bulk of the annotations I need, and I can fiddle around with it, change the method name if I want. I could change the bulk of the method to do something more helpful. Right now it just prints hello. And you can see as I save that as well, dev mode is picking up that change. And I can just define what path I want that application to be available at. So next I want to show that you can debug your Liberty application on the fly. So by default, it exposes a debug port. So if you saw there, it exposes 7777 by default. So I can just connect my Eclipse JVM debugger to that port. And right away, I have debugging support. So I'm just going ahead and adding a breakpoint here into that health check class that I created. I'm going to access that endpoint, and we switch to debug perspective, and we can use our Eclipse debugger as you normally would with any application and just step through your code, which is nice. So you don't really have to do too much extra configuration to connect the debugger to your application. Okay, and the last part of this Eclipse demo now is going to be testing our application. Oh, so here I am just stopping my dev mode instance as well. You could do that from the dashboard view or again, command line. So now let's create some integration tests to test our REST service. And here I want to highlight that dev mode in particular makes it very easy to run your tests as you create them. So here I am defining a new integration test for that cafe service that we created before. And you can see already I'm using JUnit, but I have compilation errors. Dev mode picked it up, my editor picked it up. And so that's because I don't have the JUnit dependencies in my pom.xml file. So I'll go to my pom.xml and add them, and dev mode will actually pick up changes as well to your dependencies. So as I add those dependencies right away, dev mode tries to recompile, says tests were able to recompile, which is great. So that's pretty cool as well. And now I'm starting dev mode again, but this time I'm starting it with hot tests on. So I added the hot tests equals true flag there to the instance of dev mode that I'm starting. And what hot tests is it will run tests for you after every source code change, which is nice to get that immediate feedback so you don't have to keep triggering the test to run every time you make a code change. So here, just waiting for it to start up, and then we should see that the tests run as soon as the application starts up. Okay, so there's dev mode starting up, and then right away, it starts to run our unit tests, which we don't have for this application, our integrations. So we can see that cafe service integration test we wrote ran, it passed successfully, which is great. So now let's go ahead and make a source code change. Oh, actually, sorry. I also wanted to show you can, from the dashboard view, you can view your integration test report. So this will open in your default browser the integration test that Maven generated for us. Now we can go ahead and make a source file change. So let's say I take the latte drink off the menu here and save. On save, it's recompiling and automatically running tests for us. And you can see that change resulted in a test failure because I was checking the size of my menu and the menu size changed. So when I click on View Integration Test Report now, we can see actually the details of that and look at that and work towards fixing that. So you could see it in the dev mode terminal as well. And when I add that change back, it'll recompile and we see, great, now our tests are passing again. So it's really great to get that immediate feedback for developers as they code, just to make sure you're not breaking your application or anything like that, which is great. Okay, and I think we're okay for time. So I have a short demo on VS Code as well. So that was all Eclipse based with some command line tools and creating a REST service. So what if I have 2 microservices running and I want to create a REST service that connects to a REST client? And that's what I'll show here in VS Code. So the first thing I want to call out is that I have a number of extensions installed to my VS Code instance, the ones we talked about earlier in the presentation. I have the extension pack for MicroProfile installed, which bundles a lot of the MicroProfile extensions for you. So you get that language support for MicroProfile, generators as well. And then I have the Liberty tools for VS Code extension installed as well too. And that will let us work with dev mode as well. So let's create a new project again, but this time I'm going to use the MicroProfile starter. So let me go back there for a minute. So what I'm doing here is opening up the VS Code command palette and typing MicroProfile, generate a new MicroProfile REST client. And this is kind of what we saw with the Open Liberty starter, but rather than in browser, we're doing it all within editor. So you see I'm getting prompts for the artifact ID of the project, the MicroProfile version I want to use, the MicroProfile implementation I'd like to use, the build tool, the Java version, and I can even go ahead and pick what's MicroProfile specifications do I want to be able to use out of the gate with this application. So picking things like health, metrics, open API, and then just it prompts me to demo into a specific folder. And I could add that to my current workspace or open in a new window. So here's that REST client application that I just generated. This time I did generate with Gradle. Excuse me. So, sorry. So with Gradle here, I have a build.gradle file, and you can see I've got the MicroProfile version there. I've also got the Liberty Gradle plugin. And similar view to Eclipse, I get this Liberty dashboard view with the project that I've created. I'm just changing the port there so that when I have both projects running, the ports don't conflict. And from the dashboard, I click Start, and that starts dev mode on my new project. Okay, so here it's just creating the server, installing features to the server, and starting up the application as well. You can see in the messages too, so like I said, Liberty will start a debug port for you by default. If the port that it uses by default is taken, it will use a randomly available port, which is nice as well. So that's what happened in this instance because I have 2 servers running. So I can see running in dev mode, I get my port information, my debug port information, and all of that. So let's check out what this application looks like right out of the box. So again, this was with the MicroProfile starter. So I can see I got a hello world endpoint, which is nice. And let's go find where that is in the code. So I see this hello controller returning. I can make a change there, add some exclamation marks. On save, dev mode will recompile. And then if we access that endpoint, we can see that change take effect immediately without me needing to take, much action from my end other than changing my code, which is great. Okay, so like I said, we want to connect our REST client to that REST service. So I'm going ahead and using the generator from MicroProfile REST client. So what I did there was select generate a new MicroProfile REST client, and it's prompting me for an Open API document. So I can actually pass it the URL of the Open API endpoint from that REST service application. Click generate into this package, verify the package name that we want to use. And what this will do is create a whole REST client interface based off of that API, Open API document. So I get this API folders and this models folder. And models folder was generated to work with my drink object. So if you remember, I had the drink, the name, the cost. And so it created a whole drink class for me just based off of the drink schema in that Open API document. And then here in the APIs folder, you can see I get some exception classes, and then I get the default API class here. And this is the bulk of what we need to make this working. So this is a whole REST client interface for us. And we can see it's got all of the endpoints there with the right post or get annotations from my REST service, which is pretty cool. So all we have to do now is make use of this default API class in order to control our REST service. And here I'm just adding what base URI I want to use for this. So I'm pointing it to the base URI of that first REST service application. And you can see as I do that, I even get some code lengths here on each method, which is pretty cool. So you can click those to actually try out each method. It just makes it easier. You don't have to keep track of all the paths and things like that, especially if you have, so many classes with so many path annotations. So here we're creating a cafe controller class to make use of that default API class and just creating it at the default path location here. So I can use the @REST client annotation from microprofile REST client here and use that default API class. Now right away you can get a warning that I've used this incorrectly. If I'm going to inject as a REST client or inject as a CDI bean, then I need to use @REST client with the @inject annotation. So this is flagged for me, which is great. I can see the problem, use the quick fix to use the @inject annotation, and now I know my code's working as expected. So here I've created a new get menu class here that just calls cafe service to get the menu. And just like that, we should have our two applications hooked up to each other. So I know this was pretty fast. Hopefully it illustrates that there's a really wide range of tools. Again, we showed Open Liberty today, but there's tools like this for many runtimes, and a lot of them are microprofile and Jakarta EE focused. So if you're using open source Java, open source Java APIs, there's a lot of tools that will really help you get started, get going, and focus on just your code rather than kind of all the extra stuff that comes with an application, building, packaging, looking up documentation, all of that. Okay, so here is a chart with just a summary of everything we've talked about, all of the tools we've talked about. So you can see we've got the columns microprofile, Jakarta EE, and then runtime tooling. So Open Liberty specifically here, but like I said, for other runtimes, Quarkus, Wildfly, Payera, similar tools do exist. So for the starters, we get the microprofile starter, we get the Jakarta EE starter, the Open Liberty starter. For building and running, we have tools like dev mode or hot deploy. For IDE editor integration, we have the language servers like Eclipse LSP for MP. We also have the microprofile extension pack for VS Code, Eclipse LSP for Jakarta, and then the runtime specific editor plugins like Liberty Tools for Eclipse, IntelliJ, and VS Code. We didn't show IntelliJ today, but there are tools like what you saw for IntelliJ as well, or it can work for any editor really. Code generators like OpenAPI tools, the microprofile REST client generator, and then automated testing, JUnit, Arquillian, JUnit today, test containers, microshed testing, and then the ability to do hot testing or run tests on demand as needed. Okay, so with that brings us to the end, and we can open it up for questions. So we'd love to hear your feedback. What do you think? Did we miss an open source tool that you know of that's out there that we maybe don't know of? And like we said, it's all open source. So if you have ideas for how to make this better or how certain features you want to see, we definitely encourage you to go check out all of those repos, open issues there if you'd like, or engage with us on Twitter.
Yeah. We also have some useful resources if you missed anything in this presentation. So to give you some extra homework, in case we haven't given you enough links already, this can be a useful reference page as well for checking out some of those specific tools that we've gone through. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for this incredible talk. I have some tips to prepare my next talk, because you record the demo, which is great because most of us have problems during the execution of the commands. And thanks for use two different IDs, which is great, Visual Studio and Eclipse, because most of the developers use different IDs. And I have a question. Can I create cloud serverless apps like Lambda function with OpenLiberty? There are compatibility lists.
So OpenLiberty doesn't specifically support AWS Lambdas. We are starting to go towards the whole like serverless speed, if that makes sense. We're using a slightly different approach in terms of we've got some new technology that's just come out around Cryu. So if you've not come across Cryu, then definitely check out that technology, CRIU, checkpoint restore in user space. And it is essentially, it allows you to be able to start the JVM from a snapshot. So it gives you the ability, it basically is supposed to be the speeds that you would get if you were looking at sort of building serverless applications without the compromise of having to give up your JVM or your JIT server. So really it's trying to get the best of both worlds. Within Liberty, we have a feature called Instant On, which works with our IBM runtime Semeru, which allows us to use that cryo technology and get really, really fast startup speeds. So if you're interested in that kind of architecture, rather than say like traditional microservices, you're looking more at the serverless side of things, then definitely check out Cryo and Instant On. We've got some blogs on it, some demos, and it's sort of only came out last month. So super brand new, super exciting.
Well, and there are not more questions, but a lot of people say thank you for this talk, and most of them like that the way that you explained the topic in a didactic way. So thanks, because not all the talks are the same or have the same approach. So thank you.
Thanks. We really enjoyed giving it. And
yeah,
as Kathryn said, we're always looking for feedback. So let us know on social media, raise an issue, whatever. This is all open source. We love the collaboration.
Yeah, the idea of the open source is share ideas. So if you have any question, anything that could be improved, just contact with Grace on Kathryn and to your idea, to talk your idea or what problem or which bug you detected on OpenLiberty. So thank you for sharing this talk. Thank you for your time on this conference. And perhaps the next year we will see in person or online. We don't know yet, but it's a great idea that have different speakers from different parts of the world.
Thanks so much for having us. We've had the great time.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you.